Okay, so here's an example of a very, very simple yet full stack application. So what you do here is just you can change a password and then it will display that password right here, but with an @ in front of it. So we can try it. We can put Mary and submit that, and it will change the password to Mary. So this is very simple. It's completely useless, but it can give you an idea of how a full stack website can work. So I can show you the code that actually makes up this website. And I know that you're probably new to this, so it might be a bit confusing, but just to give you an intro. I talked about client side and server side in the earlier section, and here you can see the client side code here, which is the HTML. And then up here you can see the server side. And you might be confused because I said that they're very separate, and that's true. But then why are they in the same file? And that's quite a confusing concept to understand. But actually, when someone calls up this website, like I'm doing here in the URL, actually the server will only reply with this. It will only reply with the HTML. And this will only be working on the server. It's not going to call up all this text here, because that's useless to the user. This is the actual content of the site that is important, and this just does the contacting to the database. But let me explain what this code actually does. So here we have the content of the site. So here I'm specifying that we have a little box that says username, as you can see here, and then a little box here that will give the output. And you can see that here I'm using a server script to say which username the user has put in. And then here we have a form, so where the user can input some information, which is right here, where I can change the username. And that's specified by a HTML form. And then we have a few input fields, one being the submit and one being the actual place where you put in the text. So this all happens on the client side, but if you just were to write this without any styling, I can show you what that would look like if I just misspell the name of the style sheet. You see, it would just look like that. And that looks horrible. Nobody's gonna want to go into this site more than once. Although it would perfectly well work. I mean, if I put Jack, you see, it will show Jack. But it's just not gonna be very user-friendly. So what I have to do is style the site. And to style a site, as I said earlier, you have to add some CSS code, which means cascading style sheet. And this right here is a cascading style sheet. And this, all it does is basically just tell the HTML to arrange itself in a way that is friendly. And the developer, the designer, in fact, has to code this CSS so that it does a good job to do that. So I can reload it here, and you can see, and this is the result. So here, what exactly I'm doing is centering it with this section here. You're going to learn all about all these methods here. But you can see how the syntax works. You're selecting an element, like a div tag, as I've specified here. And then I just call these HTML elements, and I tell them what to do. So I say, you have to space yourself from the top by 50%, and space yourself from the left by 50%, and then the background color, height, all those things. And then I can specify fonts, so Courier New, that's the font there. And I can specify fonts of the placeholder inside the input field. I can specify the width. I can design the button. If you see I hover over the button, then it's going to change, and that makes it a bit interactive for the user, and that's good. And you can specify that by using this little hover. You're going to learn, as I say, all of this later, but you understand how this works now. And for this to actually have an impact to the HTML, because if you just put it in the same folder as I have here, I put these two files in the same folder, simple site and simple site style. But if I just put them in the same folder, it won't do anything. You actually have to link it. And that's one of the things that you do in the HTML header, the head. So you just say that you link to this HTML page a style sheet, and you specify what that style sheet is. And then that just means that the HTML is going to call it, and then CSS will work on the HTML and styling it so that it looks good. Then up here we have the server-side code, and this is what in a professional website environment would be done by the back-end developers, because this actually works on the server side. As I said, the server is where the website is, and then the user calls it from the server. So this code all stays on the server. It doesn't get called up as this, because when the user types in the URL, this will be brought to the browser. In fact, I can show you if I inspect the page here, you can see the source code. And this source code here, in fact, is identical to what I've written here, as you can see. So HTML, the head, it's all exactly the same. And because that's what's called up to the browser. While this code here, you can't see it. However, in this little section here where I'm saying that the PHP can echo a value, then it will show, because echoing means that it will be called by the client when the client calls the website. But the actual text here is not going to be called, because this is just functions on the server. That's just very important to understand. But what does this PHP do? Because this is PHP, as I say, and you can see that there's PHP there. And basically what it's doing is taking the value that the user puts into the input here, and it checks if it's set. It checks if it's empty, because if it's empty, you don't want the user to put in an empty username. Let's say if this is a real website. And then it talks to the database that I have in this computer, in my computer here, and it will exchange information. So it will say, okay, so the user's put in this value, I'm going to send it to you and you store it. And then here in the selection, it will say, hey, remember that username? I'm gonna call it back from you. So it will take it from the database and then make it into another value here. And then that value here is echoed by the server onto the client side, so then we can see it. So that's what happens. You put in the input, you send the input over HTTP to the server, because remember that this is all server-side code, this is client-side, so that there needs to be an HTTP request between the two parts of the website. It's not just as easy as communicating between one side, like in the client side or server side. So when you click submit, you're sending an HTTP request to the server. And in my case, I have this site on localhost, and local just means that I have the server and the client on the same computer. And that's what all developers do. They're not going to put their site online and then have it in another server and then call it every time they need to do an HTTP request, because that's very time-consuming, quite expensive. So they just have both the server and the client on the same computer. I'll teach you how to set up a server in your computer. It's very easy. So then you can do this too. But for now, I have localhost set up here. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I have to make a HTTP request to the server. Even though it's located in the computer, they're located in different places, and the communication between them is still an HTTP request. So yeah, so that's what happens when you click submit. You're sending an HTTP request to the server, and then the server here will talk to the database and will put in the username that you typed in, and then reselect it out and then display it right here after an @ so that, as in many social media will have an @ before the username. Here I specify that you put an @ in front of it. And so it's by every definition a full stack application. And to understand that a little bit clearer, I'll just show you the database. So here this is a very, very simple database, and this is read by a program on the browser. You can actually see the database in other ways on the computer, because all it is just a file stored in the computer that is all coded and encrypted so that people can't access it, and it's hidden very deep into the computer. But here it can be read. So this is what a database looks like. And this is incredibly simple because the username is very simple. But if I reload this page, because there I've got username W, you'll see that the username is Jack. If I change this to Mary, submit, and I reload this, you'll see that the username is Mary. And that's all done by this PHP. That's why PHP is so important, and it's the backend language. That's why the backend language is so important. Because the backend language here is saying update username, set username, that's saying to the database, set the username to this value being uname, and uname being the value that is being taken from here, from this input field right here, called username. So in the post basically receives the HTTP request from that, saves it as this variable, uname, and then in this function here, this MySQL function here, you bind it to the function and it will communicate to the server. And then here, it will reselect it back, put it into another variable, and display it here. And I've been using the word variable. I say this often, but you're going to learn this later as well. But variable is basically, maybe if you know algebra, x and y, those are variables because they can have different values. And uname selected just means a variable. And in PHP, they're defined by the dollar sign. And you can give them different values, but they have a specific name to represent that value. And here, it just binds that variable to the value that is taken when you're selecting the username from the database. And then that's displayed right here in front of the ad. So this is a complete full stack application. We can try it again. Let's put Tom. Submit. And you can see here that the username is changed. And here, this database might be a bit confusing because it seems very simple. It's just, one term. And you could say, why bother? You could do this in many ways just to display it. But I'll show you a slightly more complicated table, which is what it would look like normally. This is a table of a few US states and their populations. So you can see they have different columns. So this is a column of the ID that I gave it, then the column of the states, names of the states, and then the populations. So this is what a table will normally look a bit more like. Because then the PHP can talk to the server and say, hey, send me the population of the state that has the name Alabama, and it will return that number right there. Or give me the ID of the state that has 3,303 population, and then it will give you 3. So normally databases are used more that way than just putting one value in. And I'll show you the database of something more like a social media site. These are all fake users, but this is what something like Twitter or Facebook is going to have in their huge data centers. They're just going to have a huge database with information a bit like this. So they're going to have, IDs, emails, usernames, full names, hashed passwords, all put in this very, very neat table that then the PHP can access exactly in the way that this works. So I hope you understand this, because once you understand this, then all of web development is at your fingertips, because there's not much else. I mean, obviously this is just touching the surface, because HTML and all these languages are incredibly complex and deep, but this is really the basis of how it all works.